This is a demonstration of Wirecast. 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 This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I'll make the announcement.
Okay, 400?
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
just wanted to double check.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Sorry.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Yes. No. Are we going to? Well, there is a resolution that went to committee and is going to come out of
This
committee
is a
to
demonstration of Wirecast.
council. It was in committee last Wednesday, I think.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, and I couldn't be there. I was at a council meeting.
Okay.
Spoke with the committee about it. But yeah, the resolution up to 25 to 50. About doing it, and then it just fell off the radar screen, and then we brought it back. Finance and budget, right? Because we actually, before we brought it back, we did sort of an
This is a
analysis.
demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Right? Now it's going to get like in this.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Calling the 7 p.m. public hearing to order. If anybody is here for TP&Z, it is in room 400, just as a, okay. This is a public hearing, ordinance amending parking restrictions. Roll call, Ms. LeBreau?
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Winograd. And Mr. Williams.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBrun. We'll start with a presentation from the town.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'll invite our Director of Community Development, Mark McGovern, to come forward and make a presentation. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. I apologize for my voice. I'm a little hoarse today. But good evening. Mark McGovern, Community Development Director.
Demonstration of
As many of you know, we thanks, Pat. We started working with the neighbors who are here tonight in the neighborhood known as west of Center, as we call it, the area of Arapahoe, Woodrow, 4 Mile, Ellsworth, Lower LaSalle, back in 2016, when there was an ordinance that was submitted to the council related to density in the center, which was ultimately withdrawn. We were tasked with working with the neighbors on an initiative. They worked with us very closely for many months on an outreach campaign that resulted in some guiding principles for the center. One of those principles was to manage traffic and parking to reduce impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods of the center. That led ultimately to our incentive zoning ordinance. And when that was completed, the neighborhood asked the town to continue working with the neighborhood on other issues beyond that of the zoning regulations and some of the things that are impacting their neighborhoods, and in particular, on-street parking and late-night parking. And so fast forward to 2018 now, we began working with the neighbors, and we had a bit of a negotiation over time, a lot of compromise in terms of what we thought could work for them, what they were seeking as a means of reducing some of the negative impacts to late-night parking. And that late-night parking was generally a combination of employee parking as well as patron parking. Excuse me.
A demonstration of Wirecast.
What we settled on were two sort of major recommendations, one of which can be implemented through the town manager as legal traffic authority, but the other required an ordinance, which is what you have before you tonight. The material that was discussed both at the Community Planning Committee and the Public Safety Committee was included in your council package, and it has some maps that show what the existing conditions were, as well as what's being proposed as the two major initiatives of this project. One would be eliminating on-street parking on certain blocks altogether. And so you have a map showing some red areas on Woodrow, Ellsworth, LaSalle, and Pelham, which parking would only be allowed on one side of the street. On the other side of the street, it's recommended that parking be prohibited starting at 11 o'clock. We presented this to CPPS in May, and it was at that point that the Corporation Council realized that we would need an ordinance to provide the authority to the Legal Traffic Authority to implement the other aspect of our proposal. In looking at that, it was also realized that the existing omit process for the police to allow parking after 2 a.m. was never included in the town code. So the proposal before you addresses the issue of no parking after 11 o'clock on a street designated by the local traffic authority. So our feeling is this is a good first step in addressing the issues that were brought to the town by this neighborhood. And we're looking at it as a pilot of sorts. We're hopeful that it will work. We have reason to believe that it will be helpful. I think you'll hear from the residents tonight about that. We also realize that if the ordinance is approved, the town manager would have the authority to make tweaks as needed. So we can see what works, what doesn't, and if we have some stumbles, we can rectify that. We also have a number of neighborhoods also looking at this very closely because they're interested in the same thing. That's mainly some of the streets, parallel streets north of Brace Road. So we have an opportunity, if this works in this limited area, to determine on a case-by-case basis, working with residents, whether or not it's an option for them as well. So.
Mark, could you cover the business outreach that we conducted as well as
Sure.
our research
This
with
is a
the Main Street
demonstration of
organization?
Wirecast.
Yes, so Kristen Gorski's here, our economic development specialist. She went door to door on both LaSalle and Farmington Avenue and spoke with the management in almost every shop or restaurant on those two streets that potentially have either employees or customers parking in the neighborhood. And she got a lot of feedback. It took quite a lot of time to go through that over probably a 2.5 to 3 week period. She heard sort
This is a
of pros and
demonstration
cons. She
of
heard
Wirecast.
some liked it, some didn't. We heard from many shop and restaurant owners that they don't want to manage parking for their employees. They just assume it will work out sort of on its own. It was also an opportunity for Kristen to remind them of the incentive parking program that was established for employees, discounted parking at the town center garage. At that point in time, there were about 21 or 22 businesses that had taken advantage of that program.
This
Since
is
the
a
outreach, another 3 have
demonstration
signed
of
up.
Wirecast.
And about 35 to 40 individuals have monthly passes in that garage as opposed to parking elsewhere. In terms of research that came up at the public safety meeting, we looked at the issue from the point of view of whether or not we could identify a comparable community that has a center as vibrant as what we have in the center that's up against single-family homes. We didn't come up with any. We contacted Connecticut Main Street to get their input, see if they thought there was a
This is
comparable
demonstration of Wirecast.
downtown that we could look at. They didn't have an option. So we admit that this is a unique approach to what we think is a unique challenge.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Are there questions? Bless you. Are there questions for Mr. McGovern or comments? Oh, Mr. Sweeney.
Mark, thank you for all the work you've done on this. So I just have a quick question. So with regards to surveying of the businesses, which businesses
This is
do
a
we have
demonstration
that
of
written down, like
Wirecast.
their comments? Do we have their feedback? How do we know who didn't like it? Was it the smaller ones, the bigger ones?
I could ask Kristen to answer that. And she didn't take down the data. She didn't do a survey per se. She went in, had a conversation with the different managers or owners, provided a copy of the ordinance, I think maybe provided a copy of the map. And she can talk specifically, answer your questions about that.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kristen Gorski, Economic
is a
Development Specialist.
demonstration of
So
Wirecast.
what Mark said, as I went into the businesses, I handed out the information. I talked about the proposed changes. I did not write down specifically everybody who either did or didn't have were in favor of the ordinance. However, some specific comments I did write down on a spreadsheet. I do have that. I think that primarily the restaurants seem to be most affected or would be most affected by the ordinance because they have larger staffs. They also perhaps aren't at the
This
same
is a
hourly
demonstration
wage,
of
so they would
Wirecast.
be a little bit more affected by any changes.
And was the Chamber of Commerce consulted in this?
Yes, they were. Yes, as well as the West Hartford Center Business Association.
Okay. And who comprised of who is comprised of the community group outside of the folks that are here tonight?
It was made up of residents and then staff from planning and zoning, engineering, public works, parking,
This
and the
is a
police department.
But
demonstration
not the
of
businesses
Wirecast.
that be impacted by it?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Dodge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just brief, as far as the outreach to the neighborhood, what was kind of the geographic extent of that? Was it just the streets directly bordering town center, or did you, because one concern I have looking at the current plan that you guys have for the restrictions would be that instead
This
of
is a
pushing parking
demonstration of
inward, we
Wirecast.
might end up pushing it outward.
Right.
And so that's why I'm just curious, kind of how far out your outreach went, whether anybody raised that concern.
Yes, that was a particular issue. The most recent working group was established following a larger parking meeting that reviewed some of the proposals we were considering. And so we asked for volunteers, but we also did try and balance it out based on where they lived. The big question really is whether or not Woodrow is far enough west.
This is
So we
a
made sure we had
demonstration of Wirecast.
a resident, at least one resident from 4 Mile Drive Road, understanding that the parking could move that way. You're absolutely right. What we do want is the on-street parking to go to off-street lots in the district and not spread out. So we looked at the timed walk, we looked at input from residents, and we acknowledged that if that were to happen, that would be an example of a tweak we could make. We have the same issue going southward, so we go
This is a
on certain blocks on
demonstration of
Woodrow, but not all the way down to
Wirecast.
the boulevard, for instance. So it was kind of an area based on where we were seeing cars already, because we were doing counts. Parking was doing counts at different times of the evening over the course of several months, as well as firsthand experience from the residents.
And I think obviously the impetus for this is the issues regarding West Hartford Center, and I think you described it as kind of a pilot program. There's other streets that might be interested at Brace Road. Are there
This
other
is a
neighborhoods in
demonstration of
town
Wirecast.
that have expressed any interest in this? Are there, because it would apply townwide, correct?
Well, no, it wouldn't apply townwide. It would only apply in designated streets designated by the town manager.
Well, I guess what I mean is the town manager could do it anywhere in town.
Correct. So the only other, there are two areas. And the one that come to mind, one is I mentioned Clifford, Ardmore, just north of Brace Road. There have been a number of residents who've contacted us, and we've talked to them about where we are in the process, and I would expect that they're going to be
This is a
interested in
demonstration of
at least
Wirecast.
evaluating something similar. The other I'd say is Park Road. That's a little bit of a different challenge, though, because we don't have off-street parking on Park Road. But historically, commercial district parking has gone, north and south of Park Road in different areas, and we do get complaints about resident patron parking on those streets.
And so if we did expand this to another neighborhood, not in West Hartford Center, if we expand to Elmwood or Park Road or something, would you imagine, I mean,
This
there's
is
no
a
provision in the
demonstration
current
of
statute
Wirecast.
ordinances it's drafted for, say, notice or outreach to the neighborhood. How would you envision that happening? Would there be outreach to a local street where we were contemplating this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I first off, I think we'd only contemplate it if there's a significant number of people who come forward and identify a problem. And that's generally the basis upon which we work when we're dealing with issues in the right-of-way, mainly traffic, whether or not a stop sign or a stoplight might be needed, whether or not people want sidewalks, things
This
like
is a
that. We usually work on a
demonstration
sort
of
of
Wirecast.
whether a formal or informal petition basis. If there's a demonstration of interest, then we would form a group similarly to what's been done over the last few years west of the center. So absolutely, I think we would work with local stakeholders, and then any decisions wouldn't come before there were significant public information meetings and opportunity to meet with any residents who would be affected. We would typically, any change to the right-of-way, also send direct mail
This is a
to.
demonstration of Wirecast.
I imagine we'll probably be hearing from some folks tonight. Was there anybody who objected as this outreach happened? I know you mentioned some of the businesses had concerns. Were there any residents who had concerns?
I don't think we received any concerns about the proposal as it is now. We most certainly received requests to do more, which we felt we weren't able to do. I think the best example of that was there were several residents
This is a
who were interested
demonstration of
in
Wirecast.
resident-only parking. And we talked with the neighborhood about the administration of that and how the town wasn't prepared to go that far. So I'd say that's probably the closest complaint we had, was that some wanted more done.
Okay, Mr. Dodge? Ms. Fay?
Thank you, Ms. Cantor. This is great. This is a quality of life issue for our residents that we've heard about very much.
This is a demonstration
And,
of Wirecast.
I think it's terrific that you're addressing it. The spread creep is going to be an issue for sure as it pushes out to other residential streets. I know parking is a very big concern from folks. Either they don't want to pay, they don't have the means to pay, and it's affecting the shop owners and other businesses that there's not enough parking or enough reasonable cost parking. So as we do this, which I'm supportive of the neighborhood, quite frankly. And I think like I said, it's a quality of life
demonstration
issue.
of Wirecast.
What can we do to help some of the businesses still continue to thrive and make assurances for their people who are working there that they have a safe, secure parking area that's accessible? I know we have the garage, which is terrific. I think that's a really good solution for now. I really do. But for some of the people who carry lots of stuff, I hear from the businesses mostly, they call me a lot. To go all the way over to that garage, it's cumbersome and it's hard for them to carry their supplies and their materials and this.
This is a
So what can we do
demonstration of
to
Wirecast.
alleviate some of the business folks' concerns about parking? I understand people want passes and this and that, and we're not ready to address that, nor can we right now due to finances. But can we do something for the business community to either assure that people can come to their shops and have parking that's not so expensive? You guys used to have, I forget what it was, a half an hour free or something if you parked in the lot. I don't know if that still exists. Or something for the owners actually to encourage them to
This is
still
a
be part of
demonstration of
the center, which is
Wirecast.
very vibrant and important.
Well, I wish John Phillips and Brooke Nelson were here right now, since they run parking. But I'll just take a stab at the fact that we've had a paid parking environment in the center for decades. And those rates haven't been changed in a long time. I think it was contemplated recently, and they haven't changed. So I think that's one thing. For employees, we've developed a program at a central garage. The town also has, it's a
This
workforce
is a
parking program
demonstration
for
of
those working in
Wirecast.
Blueback Square for the two garages in Blueback. The issue is in parking is how do you have the right sort of parking for that parker? And so what this tries to address is longer term parking, people who are staying 3, 4, 5 hours, or perhaps an 8-hour shift. And those are the sort of parkers you want in an off-street environment. I don't think the issue is so much
This is a
during the day
demonstration
when
of
someone might
Wirecast.
park for an hour, walk into the center and come back. The bigger issue is someone who's parking for 6 or 7 hours and coming back to their car at 2 in the morning and being loud or engaging in behavior that doesn't meet community standards. So I think we continue to work with the businesses through Kristen's outreach, trying to come up with new programs where possible, and we do our best with that. But it is a difficult issue. There isn't
This
one
is a
thing I think that
demonstration
we're
of
missing that we can
Wirecast.
do that's going to be really a boon for all the businesses.
Just wanted to add one thing. So as it pertains to the town center garage program, so the outreach was actually really great. And I actually ended up doing more businesses than just Farmington and LaSalle. I spread on to South Main as well. So although many of them had been told about this program in the past, a lot of people, either it was a new owner or a new manager. So it was just reiterating the fact that that program existed. Many of
This is a
whom, thought it was the
demonstration
first
of
time that they were
Wirecast.
hearing about that particular program. And I think that that's why in the last couple weeks, we've seen 3 new businesses sign up for that program. So just continued outreach, I think, is.
Thank you, Ms. Fay, and I do want to thank Ms. Gorski for her tremendous work on this. It was a long time in the making, and it was a lot of hard work. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And to share the mayor's sentiment, thanks, Mr. McGovern, Ms. Gorski, and of course, I think Mr. Dumais was involved in this as well.
is a demonstration
Balancing all the
of
interests is
Wirecast.
really difficult because a lot of people care, and they should. But one of the things that I also thought was part of your analysis was that once it gets to be around 11 o'clock, there's another wave of patrons to the center area. And at the same time, by that time, we also have capacity at our parking areas, including the one around Town Hall, which is open to the public. Isn't that true? That's
Yeah.
part of the thought process here?
Absolutely. In the data collection we did, it was twofold. We counted cars
This
on
is a
street,
demonstration
but we also
of
counted
Wirecast.
spaces that were available at the Arapahoe lot, Farmington lot, Brace lot. And so absolutely, at 10 or 11 o'clock, there's a turnover, and there are spaces available. It comes at a cost, but those are the parking spaces that are designed for those who are coming in to go to the restaurants later in the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Hart, we had talked about the paid parking and the benefit to
This is
the
a
businesses
demonstration
and
of
the community with
Wirecast.
paid parking. I just want to know if you would like to review that for a minute, because that 11 o'clock component is important. So we also, right, use that funding for.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that, Mayor. And Mark, if you'd like to add on, feel free. So we have a paid parking system. It's important for a few key reasons. Number one, we rely on a shared parking system as opposed to allocating spaces to
This
specific
is a
businesses.
demonstration
So
of
turnover is
Wirecast.
important to us. It's important to our businesses. That requires enforcement. Enforcement comes at a cost. You can pay for it through user fees like we do. Some communities establish business improvement districts where the businesses in that district will pay an additional tax that covers parking and other services. We also use the parking revenue that we take in to help maintain the center. For example, we do a daily
This
trash
is a
detail every
demonstration
morning.
of Wirecast.
I think it starts at 6:30, 7 a.m. Our parking services staff goes out and does a trash sweep throughout the center, which is very beneficial. The proceeds also help pay for planters and other infrastructure improvements that we need to make. So parking, especially on the scale that we have here, it never comes for free. You know, someone's going to have to pay for it somewhere. And the option that West Hartford chose decades ago and still continues to work well, in our view,
This
is a paid parking
demonstration
model.
of Wirecast.
Mark, I don't know if there's anything key you want to add on to that based on your experience in Hartford and elsewhere.
No, I think that's right. I think the revenue it goes back into the district. I think the other area that it pays for too that's worth noting is removing all the snow in the middle of the night, so spaces are kept open that next day for shops and restaurants. I think that's critically important. So there's access 12 months a year to all the spaces. The key Matt mentioned, it's turnover.
This is a
it comes down to
demonstration of
turnover and
Wirecast.
creating an environment where shoppers and restaurant goers have the expectation that they're going to find a space fairly close to where they're going to go. Not necessarily right in front, but fairly close. And fees are used to be able to spur that, what we call churn at the curb.
Thank you. Term of trade, Mr. Sweeney.
Sorry. I guess the big thing on here that I saw is this number for 11 p.m.
This
Can
is a
someone
demonstration of Wirecast.
tell me how we came to the genesis of this number and how we came there from 2?
Well, I think it was a negotiation of sorts in our working group meeting, and we talked about that in a couple meetings, whether or not it should be 12 or 11. And there were enough members of the neighborhood that felt strongly that 11 was most appropriate, even acknowledging the fact that, they would have guests coming to their homes that might be there past 11, and it could impact them. So
This is a
it was really
demonstration
came down
of
to a consensus
Wirecast.
of the group.
But
Yeah.
but there wasn't a negotiation with the businesses about this time.
No, because that wasn't our directive. Our directive from the council, based on the previous initiatives, was to work with the residents based on the impacts from the commercial district.
Okay, and there's no other municipality that has an 11 p.m. ban.
I can't say there isn't. I don't know. We looked at whether or not there were sort of similar environments to West Hartford
This is a
in
demonstration
Connecticut,
of
and we
Wirecast.
didn't go beyond that.
Okay. I mean, I really like the ability for the town to capture as much potential revenue through parking. I think it's very forward thinking. I think that's a really good thing to look at. I am a little troubled with a ban, and I'm a little troubled by the number not being like a scientific number that there's nowhere we've seen this work. We're just kind of settling on it
This is
based
a
on
demonstration
negotiation
of Wirecast.
that doesn't involve the business community. And I think that, that's something I think that needs to be considered before we move on something of this magnitude. And particularly the language in here, I think to Mr. Dodge's point, specifically allows for the town manager to, at his own discretion, his or her own discretion, to change it and move it to any part of the community, which for different parts of our community, we have working class folks, we have people that are
This
on
is a
different time
demonstration
schedules.
of Wirecast.
And specifically in and around the center, you have the people that work there that can't leave at 11 p.m. They're on shift till 3. The restaurant closes at 2, but they're there till 3 to close. And I think those are all things that we have to keep in mind. So I just think that it would be great to have a little bit more input from the restaurant folks, because their employees are the one that are really facing this, and they're probably the ones that are impacting it. And
This is a demonstration
I
of
applaud the
Wirecast.
folks that are here today, and I think it's great, and I understand that there's a ton of stuff that's happening in your front yard that is things you don't want to see at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. But I don't think that they're going to be, I think it just needs a little bit more of a input from the business communities, because we're in this place where we're seeing a lot of fluctuation in our own downtown. We have a lot of movement to restaurants, and that's taking up a lot of the space and real estate in West Hartford Center. I think we really
This
need to
is
have
a
them at the table
demonstration
for this
of
conversation, just
Wirecast.
because of the amount of input that they have given to this community. So I think it would be a little ahead of our skis if we don't have them at the table for those negotiations. And
Okay,
don't-
I understand your point, but that's contrary to the directive that we received over the last 3 years in working with the neighbors. So we could certainly go forward on that basis, but that wasn't how we were directed in the past.
Okay, fair.
This is a demonstration of
Mr.
Wirecast.
Sweeney, Mike? Okay, Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is sort of an offbeat question. And I applaud your efforts here to please both the residents and businesses. That is a challenge, no doubt, and your outreach is impressive. And I think it's important that the residents who have houses there have some protection. Because we're not talking about retail, where someone's coming in and buying something. We're talking about drinking and the behavior that ensues because of alcohol.
Of Wirecast.
So that's an issue. What happened? So my question is, so I appreciate your efforts here. I think it's a noble cause. Because I don't know how I would feel if someone was, every morning, drinking and stuff there. But anyways, so at one time there were these bicyclists, because I think that, the place is in the lot for these cars that are coming in at 10, 11 o'clock at night, not in front of the residents' houses, but in a lot so they can go back at their leisure and not disturb sleeping families. What happened to those bicyclists that used to bring you around? They were here for a short period and then they left, because that could be really ideal.
It was a private pedicab business. That
Just to bring people from the lots to the bars, well, no, we don't have bars, restaurants. Sorry.
So I
Okay.
believe before my time in West Hartford, that was tried in
It wasn't before your time.
pedal cabs, it was.
No, because I was here.
No, you're thinking
I'm thinking
cycling.
the bicyclists.
Oh, you're thinking of the cycling
Yeah, the cycling.
with age. So that was bringing seniors
This is a
who
demonstration
weren't able
of
to bicycle.
Wirecast.
No,
Yes.
no,
Yes.
hold on a second. Pat,
There were two programs.
okay.
One is a program that Mark is describing where people would give rides on special tricycles, really,
Yes.
to seniors.
Right.
That's one
Oh.
thing. There's a second thing. At the time we implemented Blueback, sort of as an offshoot of that,
Yeah.
we drafted a very comprehensive
This
set
is
of
a
regulations
demonstration of
allowing for
Wirecast.
pedal cabs based on a couple of companies that expressed interest in trying it. We wrote a very long and comprehensive ordinance. 2 pedal cab companies started and lasted 1 season, and we haven't seen them again. But the ordinance is still in place in case
case
anybody
we wanna
ever
put-
wants to do it again.
Bring back the pedal cabs. Thank you, I appreciate that, not just for seniors, for everybody. Thank you.
I think we should take time out to hear from the residents before we ask any more questions. So, do we have a sign-up sheet? Thank
This
you
is a
very much.
demonstration of Wirecast.
Well, I'll do it again. I did make one. But if anyone is here for TPZ, they're actually meeting in room 400. This is this is a public hearing for the town council meeting. Thank you. Okay, if I pronounce your name incorrectly, I apologize. Christine Vachera? State your name and state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
This is a demonstration
Hi,
of
I'm Christine
Wirecast.
Fischera. I'm at 21 Arapahoe Road. There are many wonderful things about the neighborhood that I live in. Most notably are my amazing neighbors, many of them who are here tonight to support the parking changes on our streets that have been proposed. We all love being able to walk to just about everywhere we need to go, to get a book at the library, pick up some groceries, catch a movie, and enjoy lots of great food, while still being part of a tight-knit, caring community. On the flip side, our center neighborhood has been dealing with steadily increasing traffic, practically impassable streets caused by bumper-to-bumper parked cars, illegally parked cars, getting blocked into our driveways by parked cars, and not to mention smashing into a utility pole, or we've even had a car that drove through a fence, across the front yard, up a flight of stairs, and onto the front porch of one of our neighbors. As a neighborhood, we all collectively hold our breath that these somewhat minor accidents will be the worst of what we see. Along with all these parked cars come their drivers. After a night at the bars and clubs in the center, they return to the cars, oftentimes drunk, and this leads to other problems: trespassing, vandalism, fighting, empty alcohol containers and other trash strewn about, vomit on the sidewalks, and on 2 other occasions that I've witnessed, lewd acts happening in parked cars.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
A little over 3 years ago, we began voicing these growing concerns to the town council. In response, they formed at the Center Parking Committee and also the Neighborhood Working Group. I'm so grateful that they did, and I'm very happy that I was able to be part of both of these groups and to be given the opportunity to work in collaboration with town employees and other neighbors over a long period of time to find parking solutions that begin to protect neighborhoods while providing sufficient parking to business patrons. I grew up in the house that I live in now. Back then, the center was used almost exclusively during the day. By 5:30, I could and did roller skate down the middle of my street. That was a long time ago, and the parking signs in our neighborhood are even older than that. They're from an entirely different era when parking regulations were established for an entirely different business center, before there was a significant late-night entertainment and drinking in the center.
This is a demonstration
I support
of
the
Wirecast.
recommendations that came out of the Center Parking Committee. There's plenty of parking available directly in the center, especially later in the evening after 10 p.m. Restricting parking on a few residential streets will not result in a shortage of parking for the patrons of the shops, restaurants, and bars, but it will help to make our neighborhoods a safer, saner place to live in. And on another upside, it'll send more parking revenue to the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Rebecca London is next, and after that is
a
David Mann. And
demonstration
if you
of
haven't signed up, you're
Wirecast.
welcome to come and speak after.
So Rebecca London, I live at 91 4 Mile Road. So to your point, Mr. Dodge, I am actually just outside of the radius of the proposed changes. I was very much happy to be a part of this process, and I support, while I do have concerns that we might see these sorts of problems begin to extend past this area. I'm very happy to support this, knowing that it sets a precedent that the citizens of the neighborhood that borders the center are listened to and involved in the process, and that should the concerns, spread, that there is an avenue for it to be addressed. I'm not quite as eloquently prepared as Christine. What I would add to her remarks, all of which I agree with and support, is that this was a very good process. In the time that I have lived, walking distance to the center, I have witnessed phenomenal change. Not as much as Christine has witnessed, but still an incredible amount of growth. And anytime we're part of a community, anytime there is growth like this, which we all support, right? We live in the center because we want what is here. At the same time, there must be an evaluation system where we continue to talk and discourse and look at what the changes are bringing, what the impacts are, and how we can meet everyone's needs. So again, I would say that this has been a very good process. It's been one that has involved business owners. It's been one that has involved residents. There is no way to meet 100% of everyone's needs, right? Like that's just not the standard. The standard is to try to figure out what everyone's needs are and then to implement ways that as many needs as possible can be met. This meets the needs of the center, businesses and employees, and really it's not the employees that as much, it's the people that are walking through our neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning, inebriated and behaving badly. Those people can pay for parking in the center that is ample and provided for them. It is not impacting business. If they can go to Barcelona and rack up a $200 bar bill, they can pay $5 for parking in a town lot that then benefits our entire community. So to your point, Mr. Sweeney, about business, of course I support the businesses in the center. It's why I live here. Their needs can be met while at the same time meeting the needs of the people that have to live in the houses and want to live in the houses that back up against the center. So again, I am that person that, lives right on the border of the proposed blocks that we're talking about. I think it speaks again to the process that I was included. And I would just say, once again, that a lot of time and energy went into this. And I think that this is a compromise that everybody can live with and that sets a precedent for meeting future needs as they arise.
Thank you, Rebecca. And the next person is David Meehan.
Hi, my name is David Meehan. I live on 24 Woodrow. And I am this close to just saying I agree with what they said and just go back to my chair, which my wife would celebrate. But I'll be quick, and if I'm going long, she'll play the Academy music to get me off the stage here. But so I echo everything with what they said, and I think they really did end up covering the bases. The only points I want to emphasize additionally are that there are other members on the committee, the Falks, Benjamin Albert, other members that agree with this ordinance. I support this ordinance, and so. In a way, I've been a part of some of these other meetings where it's a little more exciting because there's a little more debate. This one was like, no, we ended up, it took a while. Everyone talked about it. It took a couple of years, and it was an involved process. And I think Mark noted there was folks from the police, engineering, public works. There was dialogue with the business community. So this was a thoughtful process that took some time and negotiation. And I think also what Mark said was, this is a first step. It's not the final answer necessarily. It's a first step. It's just a section near the center. We'll learn from it. We'll talk about it. And so I think that's what got everyone comfortable. People that had grand ideas for other things, we just said this is a nice first step. And I think a little bit the thought process between 11 p.m. is a focus point as far as changing that parking timing. I think part of the rationale was, I think as we were mentioning earlier, it's that restaurant bar break point. And so I was definitely that bar person at a younger age. And so now I'm on the other side of 11 o'clock. And so we just kind of looked around the room and we said, well, that's kind of when that time usually is. And I love the analogy of the $200 bar bill, by the way, or $205 bar bill. But so that was sort of the thought behind it. And again, if it's 11:05, and that's when that employee or whomever is coming over from the restaurant, no one's going to, I don't think, get in harm's way there. So there was that. I thought excellent point on capacity. I don't think anyone walks around the center of West Hartford and says, if only we could have more parking buildings here. I think in some ways we feel like there's better uses of some of our existing parking spaces that we have. So I think that's good to know that the data supports that there is capacity to support those folks that are late at night and need to have somewhere. And I like the fact that it's close to the center, it's well lit, safe, So that's, again, we want to be mindful of all parties here. And also, I want to note, as far as a Woodrow resident, some of the, again, reasons why we're here are, I don't, when you get to that point where there's the cars on both sides of the road and you're going down Woodrow Street, I've seen instances where we tried to see ambulances trying to get down the street, unfortunately, and they can't. That's not good. And I've seen accidents. I've seen people back in, and so, into other cars just trying to get out. So, and they shared some stories as well. So it's the safety thing is real. I actually have a video clip from my security camera of a parked car, a pickup truck driving over another car at 2 a.m, and they went for it. I actually applaud their tenacity to. But it was reckless and bad. And again, that wasn't the employee of the restaurant. That was a late night person who had too much. So anyway, we support it. A lot of folks support it. Appreciate your time. And by the way, one more plug. Todd's not in the room, right? Todd's awesome. And Mark, great to work with as well. It's a very collaborative process. And last but not least, we've already seen action taken from this at the end of Woodrow that cuts over to Farmington. They broadened the space there, so there's a little bit less, one less spot, but you can see better now. And as one of the committee members said, he no longer has to tell his kids, hold on, when he goes and pulls out to Farmington. So that's a nice safety improvement. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this public hearing that has not had an opportunity to do so? Okay, and just another announcement, TPZ is upstairs if anybody's here for TPZ, and Todd is also upstairs, so he would be here if it wasn't for.
This is a demonstration of
Any other
Wirecast.
comments from council? No? Questions? All right, well, nobody else wants to speak, then we will close the public hearing. All right, we have two more public hearings. We're going to start the 7:15 public hearing, ordinance adopting a revision and recodification of the Code of the Town of West Hartford, Connecticut, providing for code amendments and the repeal of certain obsolete and conflicting ordinances. Roll call, Ms. LeBron.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Demonstration
Mr.
of
Dodge.
Wirecast.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Winograd. And Mr. Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Presentation from staff. Mr. Hart?
Well, Mayor, actually, I thought everybody in the room was here for this public hearing and not the previous one. But anyhow, our Corporation Counsel, Mr. Allaire, or Assistant Corporation Counsel Newsom will make a brief presentation on this item.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Good evening. Garmin Newsom II, Office of the Corporation Counsel. The town of West Hartford is required to recodify its code, to amend, to correct, and to delete items that are obsolete or not necessary. And frankly, we kind of had failed to do this perhaps in the most timely manner possible. And so we have it now for you to consider. We did go before committee and make a presentation of this ordinance. It primarily involves making minor corrections to the names of particular departments that needed to be adjusted. There were some provisions that simply have not been used, and so we've marked those for deletion. And there are other things where we attempted to address his, her, and put that as designee, making it more gender neutral. But for the most part, this is really a series of corrections, frankly minor, and for the most part, non-substantive edits to the existing code.
Thank you, Mr. Newsom. I can't imagine how exciting this must have been for you to do.
In fairness, just so that you understand, when I first received this assignment from Corporation Counsel Allaire, I believe he phrased it as, this is an opportunity for you to become familiar with the code. And it certainly was that and more, because I ended up having to read through just about everything.
No, so thank you, Mr. Allaire.
Sort of a rite of passage in our office.
This is your, yeah, okay. Any questions for council? No? All right. Is there a sign-up sheet for this? I kind of doubt it, but you never know.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this public hearing? No. This is your last chance. Okay. No sign up, and we'll close the public hearing. Thank you very much. And we will go right on to the last public hearing, which should be, yep, we're well beyond 7:25. This is an ordinance establishing a West Hartford Prevention Council. Roll call, Ms. LeBrun.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan.
This is a
Mr. Sweeney.
demonstration of
Mr.
Wirecast.
Winograd. And Mr. Williams.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. Okay, Mr. Hart, I see Ms. Rubino Turco is ready.
Having trouble with my mic. There we go. Our Director of Leisure and Social Services, Ms. Rubino Turco, will make a brief presentation on this proposal. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you. 30 years ago, the Substance Abuse Prevention Commission was established by town ordinance to advise the town council on ways to help address the problems of substance abuse in the entire West Hartford population. And over the years, it worked well. There were a couple of times where the ordinance was amended, one in 2000 and again in 2005. But recently, it became apparent that it's a bit out of date. The membership is quite large and a bit unwieldy, and there were numerous vacancies. It was really challenging for the town clerk to keep track of which seat was filled and new people coming in, which seat are they going to fill. And in addition, we really felt that the mission needed to be expanded also to include mental health. And so for that reason, we felt that changes, the best way to address this was to repeal the current one and to replace it with a new council. And so one of the issues was about practical functioning, and the other was about the mission. So first, the mission is really driven by the state organization that governs the Substance Abuse Prevention Commission, and that is the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And those two issues are very closely tied. And we receive money from them, and they rely on local prevention councils to be in place in the towns that receive funding from them. And so we looked to how do local prevention councils work, what is in their mission statements. And so we felt that by adding the words mental health to the mission that we would be able to accomplish that goal, and also to add a seat at the table that was for someone who has a background in mental health services. So the name change would support this evolution. So it would become the West Hartford Prevention Council, and that nomenclature matches what the state uses. They use, as I said, local prevention councils. So then we get to the practical part. I've seen lists of more than 20 people on this prevention commission. Mostly recently, it was about 17 seats. And we felt that right now we are recommending about 9
This is a
seats.
demonstration of
And
Wirecast.
all currently serving members of the Prevention Commission would have a seat at the new council. And that was very important to us, that we wanted to recommend to you that everybody that's been serving remains on the board and can continue to participate. We do have a few new members that have been solicited either by the Board of Education or have come to on their own to submit their name for
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
to be recommended by you to be appointed. So everyone on the current board needs to be reappointed, and we staggered their terms so that they wouldn't all leave at the same time, that they would be in 3 different groups. The new Substance Abuse Prevention Commission, which is now called the West Hartford Prevention Council, would Again, retain one parent-teacher organization representative. A member of the Youth Service Bureau would be represented.
This is a
As you know, we
demonstration of
outsource our Youth
Wirecast.
Service Bureau to the Bridge. 2 school counselors, either public or private, from either high school or middle school, and those names would be recommended by the superintendent of schools or by another private school that might have someone to serve. 3 professional providers of services, either in substance abuse or in mental health, again, adding the mental health component, and then also 2 residents who have an interest or an expertise in substance abuse or mental health issues. And this really allows for a different kind of representation. So we have professionals, we have counselors, we have people who are appointed by virtue of their work to be involved, but also we wanted it to be open to members of the public and to residents. And so those are our recommendations. The impact that this would have, we believe that it would have a positive operational impact on the functioning of the organization.
This is a
It better
demonstration of
aligns the
Wirecast.
membership of this advisory council with its expanded mission to mental health issues, and it also improves the management and operation of the council. It would result in a practical improvement in the town clerk's oversight of the advisory council. This commission grapples with important issues that are difficult to discuss. And by keeping the ex officio members, who I didn't name, but involve the town, member of the town council and the superintendent's
This is a
office, as well as
demonstration of Wirecast.
my office, police, and the health district. Having that focus, those people in attendance, will help maintain the focus on keeping our community safe and our community well. And so it's for those reasons that we submit this ordinance change and also submit the names to be appointed to this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno Turkey. Appreciate your work on this, and this was something that was discussed
This is a
in your
demonstration
committee
of
back-
Wirecast.
your Deputy Mayor's Committee, so I don't know if anybody has any questions, Mr. Dodge?
This is actually a question for Mr. Allaire, and I'm just reading through this quickly. Will the ex officio members be voting members?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge.
Well,
Oh.
I guess my question, does it state that they're non-voting members?
Subsection D, capital D,
This is a
the very,
demonstration of
the last
Wirecast.
full line shall serve as ex officio members without a vote.
This is a pet peeve of mine that goes back to being a legislative attorney, so.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Let's see.
I forgot to mention, I'm sorry for interrupting,
That's okay.
that there are also 2 high school students that would be appointed by the superintendent of schools, and they would not be voting members because they're not electors.
Right, I remember that discussion. Okay, Mr. Barnes?
Thank you. And Helen, thanks for all your work on this. I just have one
This
question
is a
with respect to the
demonstration of
appointments. Later in our
Wirecast.
agenda, I think paragraph 10 or whatever it is, we're going to appoint a slate of folks. And I think you just mentioned, I wanted to confirm that these are folks that are currently on the board, but they're being reappointed in this new capacity with respect to this new.
That's correct. There are 3 new people who are not on the board, and they are involved, they are included in that number.
Okay. And the remaining people are currently on and they're being reappointed.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Anything, anybody else? Okay,
This is a demonstration
all right,
of Wirecast.
thank you very much. Is there a sign-up sheet for this?
There is, and there's no one signed up.
Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this public hearing? All right, with that, we will close the public hearing. We will take a 5-minute break and start the council meeting. Thank you.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
How are you tonight? What are you coming here for?
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. 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 This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Sticky. Okay. All right, I am calling the 7:30 Town Council meeting to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Roll call, Ms. LeBreau.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor. Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Fay.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Winograd. And Mr. Williams.
Here.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules to present two proclamations. Second. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, we will start with fire prevention safety.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Assistant Chief Cincigali. All right. So this is our Assistant Fire Chief Cincigali, and I'm going to read the proclamation that we do for this week. Whereas U.S. fire departments responded to 357,000 home fires in 2017, according to the National Fire Protection Association, and home fires resulted in 2,630 civilian deaths in 2017, representing the majority, 77% of all U.S. fire deaths. And whereas the town of West Hartford's first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education. Whereas the 2019 Fire Prevention Week theme, Plan and Practice Your Escape, effectively serves to educate the public about the vital importance of developing a home fire escape plan with all members of the household and practicing it twice a year. And whereas a home fire escape plan provides the skill set and know-how to quickly and safely escape a home fire situation. And whereas home fire escape plans should be developed by all members of the household and practiced twice a year to ensure that everyone in the household knows what to do in a real fire situation. And whereas West Hartford's residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take personal steps to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of West Hartford, I, Mayor Sherry G. Cantor, do hereby proclaim October 6th through 12th as Fire Prevention Week in the town of West Hartford and urge all residents to develop a home fire escape plan and participate in the many public safety activities and efforts of West Hartford's Fire and Emergency Services during Fire Prevention Week 2019. And I would love for you to say a little.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Cantor and the entire council and the Public Safety Committee for the support that they've given the fire department throughout the years. We really are appreciative of the support that you give. And also, when I first got in the fire service in 1972, the fire deaths were more than 13,000 a year nationwide. To be in a spot where we're down to 3,000, 3,400 a year speaks well of our of the nation's fire service public education efforts, and also the receptiveness of our citizens and our residents. And in West Hartford, we're fortunate enough to have residents and citizens who are very careful with their property, very mindful of the maintenance and smoke alarms and fire safety. So we are, fortunate to have a very low fire loss rate. So we hope
This
that
is a
with continued public
demonstration of
education, continued
Wirecast.
support from the residents, and the council will be able to maintain that that same level of safety that we enjoyed today. Thank you.
Thank you for all
Mayor.
you do. Appreciate it. A second proclamation. Hello, Helen. Our Director of Human and Leisure Services, Helen Rubino-Turco, you just heard from. Whereas parks are essential to the physical, social, environmental, and economic health of a community. Whereas the National
is a
Park Trust for Public
demonstration
Land,
of
in conjunction with the
Wirecast.
National Recreation and Parks Association and the Urban Land Institute, are leading a nationwide movement to ensure that there's a great park within a 10-minute walk of every person in every neighborhood in every city across America. Whereas over 220 mayors, including West Hartford Mayor Sherry Cantor, have come together to support the 10-minute walk campaign and are increasing equitable park access, and equality through local policy changes, master planning efforts, and appropriate funding.
demonstration
And
of
whereas special
Wirecast.
activities have been held this spring, summer, and fall in the town of West Hartford in support of the 10-minute walk initiative, and whereas Thursday, October 10th, 2019 is National 10-Minute Walk Day, and whereas a ceremony to celebrate the town of West Hartford's participation in the 10-minute walk will be held on Thursday, 10/10/2019 at 10 a.m. at West Hartford Town Hall, followed by a ceremonial tree planting at the Trout Brook Trail, a linear park. Now therefore be proclaimed that on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of West Hartford, I, Mayor Sherry G.
This
Cantor,
is
do
a
hereby proclaim
demonstration of
Thursday,
Wirecast.
October 10th, 2019 as the 10-minute walk day in West Hartford. And Helen, I'm sure, will have a few more words for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. 80% of West Hartford residents live within a 10-minute walk of a public park or playground, which is a phenomenal number for an inner city, an inner suburb, inner ring suburb of a city. But we wanted to spend this year focused on trying to get people from their couch to the
This
park
is
that
a
is a 10-minute
demonstration
walk
of
away.
Wirecast.
So we did a number of initiatives, but the main one encapsulated numerous of our activities, and it's called Parks Bingo. And it runs until Halloween. So you still have time to play Parks Bingo. And for every bingo that you get entered into a drawing for a free pair of running shoes or walking shoes from Fleet Feet. So I'm very pleased that, and more information is on Leisure Services website or
This is
through
a
our department,
demonstration of
any of our
Wirecast.
facilities. I'm very pleased to have our mayor embrace this initiative. Last year, we didn't do very much. What we did was we updated the mapping and we got ourselves organized. But this year, we've really launched a number of activities that involve not just leisure services and our parks department, but also public works, the library, as well as local businesses like Fleet Feet and local nonprofits like Friends of Fern Ridge Park or the West Hartford Garden Club. So it's really been a delightful effort, joint effort to support the 10-minute walk initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, back to the agenda. We will go to number 2, Ms. Kerrigan.
And the
This
public
is a
hearing minutes,
demonstration of
application
Wirecast.
1060 Starkel Road.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. We will check to see if people are signed up for public forum. The sign-up sheet is blank. Is there anybody that would like to speak to something on the agenda that's not a subject of a public hearing? Okay. We have nothing on consent. So number 5, Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of the ordinance amending parking restrictions. Sorry. Restrictions.
This is a demonstration of
Motion's been
Wirecast.
made and seconded. Here we're going to just do a brief summary, Mr. Hart, and then I think there are a couple further questions for you.
Thank you, Mayor. As we discussed in the public hearing, the proposed ordinance is an outgrowth of a charge that the council gave to staff and our residents back in 2016, and they've
This
been
is a
working
demonstration of
diligently
Wirecast.
since that time. Under the proposed ordinance, there are two main components here. One, it would allow the town, clarify that the town has the authority to limit parking to certain sides of the street, and that secondly, we would have the ability, I would have the ability as the traffic authority to restrict parking
This is a
on
demonstration
certain
of
streets,
Wirecast.
to prohibit parking from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. The standard rule throughout town at present is the restriction runs from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. And then lastly, some years ago, we implemented an omit procedure that is administered by the police department. And that would allow someone to make a special request to gain an exception to the rule on a case-by-case basis
This is a demonstration
within a
of
particular period
Wirecast.
of time. That process, that program, was never officially allowed by ordinance. So this ordinance would fix that and codify the omit system as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And this ordinance, you had stated that one of the things is this is specific to this area. I think there is some concern that putting in
This is a
this
demonstration
11
of Wirecast.
p.m. timeframe would make this apply or could apply to everything, every area in the town. I think Mr. Sweeney, would you like to elaborate on your question?
The omit?
And the fact of the limiting the parking on that would apply to the full town. I'm a little, actually. fuzzy.
Sure. I mean,
This
we can
is a
just go on.
demonstration
I'll
of
start.
Wirecast.
I guess I'll just answer that part. So for the omit process, what I'm seeing here is and just make sure I'm following you here. You're just providing the ability for anyone to call in based on whether or not they're an owner or occupant, so renter, whoever, becomes unavailable to them or their guest as a result of an unavoidable circumstance. We're not gonna get into the weeds with that with folks, because I do know that has become something that people have been.
This is
when
a
they call the police, that
demonstration
has
of
been asked
Wirecast.
them, whether it's an unavoidable circumstance.
So that is correct. We're not looking to change the current system. We're looking to essentially legalize the current system. And I want to correct one misstatement I made earlier, Mayor. I said that this ordinance would give us the authority to limit parking to certain sides of the street. Actually, that authority already exists. This ordinance would not establish that. It already exists.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Sweeney, did you have another question?
This is a demonstration of
On the
Wirecast.
Previous section? Yes.
Go ahead.
I do. Sorry. Let me just pull it up here for you. So I really appreciate the community's input on this. I think it's a very important issue in regards to public safety, having your own the respect of your front yard. I mean, I've heard it, I've seen it. I used to live in the area, so I get it. I just the wording of this troubles me from a few
This is a
few
demonstration
places.
of
One, the 11
Wirecast.
p.m. number. I mean, it was kind of basically said here today. There's no scientific reason for why we're choosing 11 p.m. It's just what we settled on. I'm troubled with that because I don't know any other community that's doing that when we have this huge downtown area that is really working well for us. I know that's not necessarily working well for you guys in regards to what's going on in your front lawn, but in regards to interfering with that, I do just want to understand why we would be doing it. I just haven't seen anything when I asked for it at the public safety meeting. I've not been
This
provided
is a
anything for that, so
demonstration of
that is a little
Wirecast.
troubling to me. I think the other piece that I have an issue with is the way this is written. It looks as if, and it reads as if, and please stop me if I'm wrong, but this basically allows for you to do this in any neighborhood in the town. And I don't think that's what the point of the group that was set up was, to address the certain circumstances surrounding the center. But this language allows for you to do this in any community. And West Hartford is a diverse community in the sense that we have people that work, second and third shifts, of which they need to address that needs to be dealt with. We have areas that have multifamily homes where people do push up against that 2 a.m. clock. And so I wouldn't want to see that extended to those places. And I just find that the language is a little bit too broad for my liking on that sense. So I would love to see us also potentially, if the 11 p.m. number isn't a scientific number, I just see the end of the day being a better number than 11 p.m. I would love to offer an amendment on that to just move it from 11 to 12. So the twofold, and if there's a way to make this a little bit less broad in the sense of maybe designating these exact streets, because to the point that you made, it's just, we want to just talk about this portion of the town and then potentially look and see if this is helping and working. I think the other thing that was troubling in the testimony I heard today was there isn't a real policy outcome that we're looking for here. There wasn't a very specific one. I understand the well-being and of people and feeling the safety in their home, but a specific outcome to see if this is working would be great to see, or have something that we're looking at. Because when we do public policy, I've seen, you expect to see some sort of desired outcome for a change of this magnitude. So I don't know if there's a way to draft this, to make it, to designate this area. That's something that I would love to see. I'll throw that over to Corp Counsel and the town manager, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Go ahead.
So let me start off. I may not hit everything that you asked. If I missed something key, please follow up. And then Mr. Allaire can add on if he so chooses. So the selection of the 11 p.m. hour, as we talked about during the public hearing,
this is a demonstration of
is there an exact scientific reason for that? No. I think it emerged from the conversation that was the conversion, if you will, from the restaurant crowd to the late night crowd. So thinking that 11 p.m. might be reasonable for most folks. Second point I wanted to emphasize, we talked about how we rely on a shared parking model, and we do have capacity available for employees and patrons, especially late night. So we have that off-street capacity is available. It's not as though the parking on these neighborhood streets is essential for the uses in the center at that hour of the day. How would we measure success? I think we would look to see to what extent our nuisance complaints have fallen and declined. And I think that would be one statistic. Secondly, I would look to see to what extent there is an uptick in the sponsored parking programs that we provide for employees. I think we already talked about how our outreach that we've conducted to date, we've got some additional subscribers because of that. That's a good thing. That's a safe place for those folks to park. Do you have the discretion to amend this on the floor? Certainly. You talked about restricting it to certain neighborhoods in town. Mr. Allaire can disagree with me if he thinks necessary, but I believe you would have that ability. I don't think it's necessarily needed at this point in time. As traffic authority under state statute, the traffic authority in any town has considerable discretion. Our practice here, though, is that we only make changes, whether they are improvements to a stop sign, stoplight, what have you. We only do that on the basis of analysis or based on a neighborhood concern.
But to that rationale, if we're doing this based off of the input by this group that has put a lot of time and effort into this,
and
it's supposed to be focused on this one specific area, why does the language reflect a town-wide policy? I mean, that's what this does.
Again, based on the testimony that was presented earlier, if this is successful for this particular neighborhood, for example, if we see a reduction in the number of nuisance complaints we receive, if it's successful, arguably it's something we could try in other neighborhoods. You talked about
Is
neighborhoods
a demonstration
that
of
host a
Wirecast.
number of multifamily units. I think we would be somewhat loath to implement something like this in those neighborhoods where
neighborhoods
they're relying, where they're,
To that point, those neighborhoods are 2-3 streets away.
but they're not immediately adjacent. These are primarily single-family home neighborhoods.
Okay, I mean, in regards to the center, there are immediately adjacent neighborhoods that are 2 to 3 family homes that are within the area, that are actually probably
This
closer
is
than
a
4 Mile
demonstration
Road
of
to the
Wirecast.
center. So I mean, I think we are in that kind of space. I mean, this specific, what has been asked for by this group, and I totally understand what they're coming from, that makes sense to me. If we can call out specifically what they're asking for in a quote unquote, as Mr. McGovern said, a pilot program sort of thing, then I think that's what we should be looking at, because that's what we asked for. We didn't ask for a townwide ordinance here. So I would love to see if there's a way we could maybe just have a recess and look at some sort of language that could address that.
This is a demonstration
I just think
of
that that's more what
Wirecast.
we were asked, that was asked of this committee, not a townwide ordinance change to impact the entire town if designated by the town manager. I think that's what we're looking at. And I again, appreciate everyone's work on here. I don't like the idea of us then designating power to, no offense to you, maybe somebody else, to change that. I think that's kind of where the council comes in. That's our responsibility it's the role that we have.
This is a
So
demonstration
I'd
of
love
Wirecast.
to see if we could play around with some language. I think that I'd be amendable to keeping the time if we could keep it to a location. But there's just a couple of things that I think that we could easily iron out on this before we implement a townwide policy. And then and then in regards to the second paragraph, in regards to unavoidable circumstances, I would just like to remove the word
This is a
unavoidable.
demonstration of
and just put it into
Wirecast.
circumstances, since at that point we are designating some sort of judgment call at that point at that point they have to call it into the police, right? So again, and I don't want this to be looked at as not appreciative of what folks have done today. I just think that we need to look at this. If it is truly a pilot program and what the initial goal was to address this community's concerns, let's address their
This
concerns.
is a demonstration
And let's
of
work on something
Wirecast.
that does that, and not do a townwide policy before we know how the outcomes of this said quote unquote pilot program that we were going to look at today. I think it's a great idea to look at and explore, but it's not something that I'm comfortable with implementing on a townwide policy, because, as I said earlier, we have such a diverse community in regards to how people work, how they get there, how they travel, and I think it just would impact people, could impact people
This
adversely.
is a demonstration
Thank you.
of
Thank you, Mr.
Wirecast.
Sweeney. I know Mr. Winograd had a couple comments, and I should have started, a lot of this came out of Mr. Winograd, or went through Mr. Winograd's committee, so, and also public safety, Mr. David.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, I'm in support of this ordinance, given some of the objections that Councilman Sweeney raised. I think that procedurally, if there are amendments that want to
This
be
is a
offered, we can either do it
demonstration
through,
of Wirecast.
I think it's procedurally appropriate to offer amendments to an ordinance and have those discussed and then voted on if need be prior to talking about the whole ordinance. So I don't want to jump in. You've raised an issue. I don't want to sort of start back at the beginning of support for the ordinance as a whole, because I think we're losing the thread of the discussion if we do it that way. Unless it's better to bring it out and then have
This is a
those
demonstration of
discussions.
Wirecast.
It seems to me you start with, either we've started sort of with the amendments. I think we would start with the initial proposal, which has been raised and seconded. Then if there are on the floor amendments, those would be appropriate to come sometime after.
That's fine. There was a pretty fundamental, I thought, potential change or
Right.
question. So I wanted Liam, I wanted Mr. Sweeney to bring that up before we.
Right, the
went
question
into
makes
further
sense. I think
discussion.
we was an answer to the question, but to the extent that the answer isn't satisfactory, then I guess I'm not sure whether, again, in our normal course, we don't usually have this complex a debate, that whether we should entertain amendments first before going to the full, or should we start with the sort of full thing and then
Well, there's a
go
couple
for
other
amendments?
questions, so let's just go through a couple of questions. I know Mr. Williams had us a question, and then we will sort of see whether we
This is a
move on one and then,
demonstration of Wirecast.
two amendments or. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Councilman Sweeney, I appreciate your perspective. Tonight, I disagree with it for sort of some of the reasons you actually raise. So, this process has involved a lot of stakeholders and has taken a lot of work from Mr. McGovern, Ms. Gorski, Mr. DeMay, residents, and that, onto itself, a lot of work doesn't necessarily mean you pass something. But I think one of the frustrations folks have with government sometimes is that it doesn't move, it doesn't get things done. And I think there has been a lot of fact-based discussion about this particular neighborhood that has brought forth a proposal as to how to address it, which includes the 11 p.m. number. I don't think it's necessarily arbitrary, because I think it's hooked to the parking availability. So when we talk about other neighborhoods, be it neighborhoods that have multifamily housing,
This is a
things of that
demonstration
nature,
of Wirecast.
the data on the ground is not going to be the same. And so the question becomes whether or not the council wants to give the discretion to the town manager to deal with those issues in other neighborhoods when it comes up or not. Like, do we trust the town manager and the staff to have the judgment to exercise it prudently in other jurisdictions? I think that's what your point is getting at. Or do we want to be a body that deals with parking times every time a neighborhood has an issue with it?
Demonstration of
And so for
Wirecast.
me, in my perspective, I would rather it be the former. I really like this ordinance myself. I think it's a very thoughtful approach to a difficult issue. And I like and support the concept of giving the town manager the authority to deal with traffic issues as they arise throughout town, because I think our town staff, being as involved in the community as it is a much better vehicle to deal with
This is a
and address
demonstration of
parking issues than
Wirecast.
we are. I think what problem we have is sometimes we're not able to spend the time in the community to understand and appreciate the issues the way that town staff is required to be. So I do think if we spend this evening restricting the ordinance to just being in the area that's specifically identified, I think the ordinance will be weaker for us. I think we can adjust the overall ordinance
This is a
if the pilot
demonstration
program
of Wirecast.
doesn't work out. And I also think if the same goes, my thought process for the time, because if we put it to midnight or we move it forward to 10 a.m. or 10 p.m., we're still dealing with a measure of discretion. So, I support the idea that this is a pilot, see how it works with the residents, the community, the businesses, and then we can move forward from there. But I would not support changing the language tonight
This is a
after we've gone through this
demonstration of
process. I
Wirecast.
think the process has gotten us to a point where we administer the proposal, see how it goes, because it is a pilot, and then we either expand it, restrict it, and deal with it from that perspective. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I'm going to try and successfully agree with both Mr. Sweeney and Mr. Williams. I had similar concerns to Mr. Sweeney, and I think that if it was restricted to a neighborhood, this would be
demonstration of Wirecast.
sort of a no-brainer for me. I do share his concern that this is giving the town manager the authority to do this on a town-wide basis. But that's not to say that I think we as a council should be involved in this on a town-wide basis. I guess that my concern comes down more to whether my concern would be when we look at the immediate problem that we're facing,
We had a very nice
demonstration
map
of
that Mr.
Wirecast.
McGovern prepared for us. We have a lot of certainty in terms of immediately, I think we have predictability in terms of how Mr. Hart is going to proceed, at least with regard to West Hartford Center. And the residents in West Hartford Center, the business owners, have obviously been very, very involved in this discussion. And, you know, I don't have any concerns that sort of there hasn't been notice to people that this might be coming with regard to West Hartford Center. So my concern doesn't come down to, you know, whether we should be involved townwide. I agree with Mr. Williams. I don't think we should. It comes down to whether when the town manager does this in other parts of town, what kind of notice would be provided to the residents of a street where there was going to be a new parking restriction, for instance. Having said that, however, I don't think that at this late hour, coming up with some kind of a notice provision is prudent. I don't think it's something that we should be doing at the table. And so it's something that I hope that, you know, perhaps we could look at going forward. You know, we can always come back and amend the ordinance. And so if we find that there's an instance where we think maybe notice is appropriate, or we want to put some kind of procedure in place so that residents on a street that might be affected by a future restriction could be informed of that, then maybe that'd be appropriate. I think tonight it's not necessary because I think, you know, hopefully this isn't going to expand particularly
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
quickly. You know, I maybe not publicly, but privately sort of advocated the repeal of the 2 a.m. Townwide parking ban. And I would actually, I think repealing it paired with something like this makes a lot of sense, because I think that in most of parts of the town, there's really no reason to have a 2 a.m. ban. And I don't think that there's many other suburban communities that have a 2 a.m. ban. So I hope that at some future time that we can perhaps look at that, and especially having something like this on the books might give us a little bit more comfort examining that issue. As far as the concerns about time, I think that sort of moving back the hour from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock is almost more arbitrary than 11 o'clock, than providing more discretion to the town manager. If anything, I would perhaps consider allowing an earlier time, only because I would trust the town manager, as he went through the process with any neighborhood, to use some discretion with that. And so I wouldn't support moving the hour back to 12 o'clock. So, you know, I guess to kind of sum up my concerns on this, I do plan on voting for the ordinance. I do have a concern about if we do start using this in other parts of the town, you know, making sure that we go through the same type of process where the residents are involved in the decision making. And I think that right now, you know, in my 3.5 years on council, I don't think I've ever seen a situation where the town staff didn't engage in robust outreach. And so I think that we have to have a certain level of trust on that. But if it is something that we want to revisit at a future date, I think that's something we could consider, you know, going forward. I do, you know, I'm not sure how, I do agree with Mr. Sweeney's concerns on the omit system in terms of putting these sort of onerous standards in there in terms of, you know, what's unavoidable or what does it mean to have parking that's not available. I did actually have one instance on when I was in my previous neighborhood, and it was before I was on council, where a police officer did not give me an omit because they didn't think that the circumstances were unavoidable. And so I think we should have an omit system. I think we should also explore the potential of, in some neighborhoods, perhaps allowing resident parking on the street. I don't know. I think that other communities have systems for allowing that. And I think that that's something that we explore, that we should explore. But I do think that as far as the omit system, I mean, right now, the way it's drafted, you can only get it for 3 days. I don't think that somebody calling in should really be required to make much more of a showing beyond I'm asking for it and I live here. So those are my feelings.
Thank you,
This is a
Mr.
demonstration
Dodge.
of Wirecast.
Mr. Williams, your mic is on. Just, I don't know if you're, okay. Ms. Fay.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. I just had to refresh my memory because you guys probably know I grew up in East Hartford. So I just remember when my dad, when they lived in the house for 60 years, and when we would all be home from college, we all had our cars or after college, and he would have to call the police officers the night before and say, hey, my kids are here. They're going to be on the street. You know, driveway's only so big. And the police department said fine. And their ordinance is from 2 to 5
demonstration
a.m.
of Wirecast.
So very similar to West Hartford. And there's probably more, restrictions or different things in the business districts. But I think we have a livable, breathable, good parking situation and ordinance. I've never personally had a problem when my, driveway's been paved and I had to have the cars on the street for a day or two overnight. It's been well accommodated. There was no issues. And to me, it's really a quality of life issue. And you guys live in the center, and it's a great place to live.
Demonstration
And
of Wirecast.
I think we need to have a balance between business and residences. It's a residential area for sure, family area for sure, with a lot of children. I walk around there a lot. So I think there's a way to balance it. I think 11 o'clock is reasonable, for sure. And we do have parking in other places. The mayor's made accommodations with the garage. That works quite well. There's lots of garages, there's lots of parking, there's lots of lots. And if you want to be a little bit further, now we've got the purple bus.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
I mean, you can take the bus in town. So I think this is reasonable. I do believe that residents deserve a quality of life, regardless of where they live. And I don't want to bring up a sore subject because I know it was very painful for all of us, but this is not unlike Los Imperios, where there was a lot of things that happened in the neighborhoods as a result of unsavory activities happening late at night from a big bar or a club. So I think we need to maintain our residences and
demonstration of Wirecast.
keep them pristine and safe. And you pay a lot to live near the center, and I'm supportive of this. I know another town that has very similar restrictions. They seem to work. I've never had a problem if I had to park on the street, which is very rare. And I think that's a good thing too, that you don't want cars lined up in your street overnight all the time and, not be able to get safety vehicles through or ambulances or whatnot. So I'm in support of the public and what you folks had to say, and I like this ordinance. And I think, ordinances can be amended if it doesn't work. And I certainly trust Mr. Hart to be able to use his discretion with his staff of where we would have to apply them down the road. We have to be prepared for change in our town and growth and good growth. So I can see, the new park corridor turning into another sort of center, retail, restaurant establishment, Park Road. Other places where we may have to do something, not now, but down the road. So I would trust that this is flexible enough that we could implement changes if we need to.
Thank you, Ms. Fay.
Thank you.
Do you want to go?
I feel like we've entered the filibuster hour.
No.
Well, if we can get this to midnight, then we don't have to vote on it. It's actually.
You don't have to.
Well, it's
You don't-
surprising, in 6 years, we've very rarely find an issue that receives so much attention and deep thought at the table that gets both sides engaged in having such a polite discussion here at the table, other than, well, not budget night, but it's
This is a demonstration
it's
of
been great.
Wirecast.
I mean, it's just really interesting conversation. When I came in tonight, I didn't think we'd elicit this much conversation about this topic, but I think we have gone through a process, and I think the goals or what we want to accomplish are basically defined. I agree that maybe the metrics of kind of evaluating that in the end may not be crystal clear, but I think it does come down to a quality of life issue in and around the center. And as I think Mr. Dodge said at the beginning, we want to get cars to go into those spots and not go out. And if that's the result, then we're going to have to, address that issue as well, because that's not solving the problem. It's just moving the problem into a different area. So because it is a pilot and because we've spent a lot of time working on these issues, I think it is a, something that I can support, at least, to have it go through the pilot to see if it's effective, and see what
This is a
impact it has in
demonstration of
and around the
Wirecast.
center. So, with that, I'll end my filibuster.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Mr. Winningrad, you want to go?
Thank you, Mayor. This whole issue, is kind of personal to me. I grew up on 4 Mile Road, and grew up in the center, and actually I've told the story a lot of times about how I once got stopped by the police with a friend of mine because we were in the center at 9 o'clock at night on a Friday, and it was obvious that we were up to no good, because there'd be no other
This
reason
is a
for anybody
demonstration
18
of
years old to be in the
Wirecast.
center at 9 o'clock on a Friday, because we probably weren't heading to Edelweiss. And when I first ran for election 4 years ago, I remember knocking on the door of somebody on Woodrow who sort of pointed out the cars and said, please do something, can we do one side of the street parking? And I said, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I'm like thrilled that now we're actually getting to that, and you've all been patient. But one of the
This is a
sort of worst thing
demonstration of
that happened to me
Wirecast.
after I got elected 4 years ago is it was my committee, community planning, and we had a proposal for a zoning change in the center that we all looked at and said, this makes a lot of sense, and we moved it on, and we came to a public hearing, and some of you in the room, and quite a few more of you in the room, gave us hell. And it was actually quite, a little bit like, deer in the headlights look from some of us, speaking for myself, certainly. And, we promised that we would, in fact, slow down a little
This is
bit.
a demonstration of
Because the goal, what we
Wirecast.
were trying to do there was, I think, vitally important to the future of West Hartford. We need to do smart development in the center. I'm proud of the incentive zoning ordinance we ended up passing. And part of the reason we were able to pass it, and it took 3 tries to finally get it done, was because of the really responsible way that your community reacted to it. It wasn't just a NIMBY kind of reaction. It was, how do we get involved? How do we jump in and make this better?
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
That was a great reaction. And you came in and said, listen, like you said tonight, we want this center to succeed. We want business. We're here for a reason. And that was quite a different reaction than other parts of the country get for some zoning changes. So I was really impressed and proud, because I'd lived in the neighborhood, of the reaction of the neighborhood to what could be a pretty scary idea. So you had your meetings and you trusted,
This
and
is a
we passed
demonstration
the
of
zoning
Wirecast.
ordinance based in part with your support, or at least not strong opposition, because you were trusting that we would honor the system we had set up. And now, a few years later, you're coming to us with the results of that system. And I think that's how it's supposed to work. It's the transparency, the community involvement, and then I think that we then end up with enabling legislation, in effect, that we now
This is a demonstration
enabling
of Wirecast.
the manager to do in your neighborhood what is appropriate for your neighborhood, we think. Again, we'll try it out. But I think it is then appropriate to give you the powers to then, as other neighborhoods go through the same process, if they make different decisions, you'll have some leeway to do the same thing. And I trust this is a model, not only a pilot program for parking, but also a model for how staff interacts with a neighborhood. And that is just something that I think we should celebrate
This is a demonstration
and
of
endorse tonight.
Wirecast.
So certainly supporting this. In terms of the times, again, I think that with between 10 or 11 or 12, again, I think that goes within the discretion. Not 10, but certainly if it turns out like the metrics, if it isn't working, then you have that ability to move it. But again, I think we should trust in that process of community involvement, and we certainly myself on council, that's what I expect. For other neighborhoods, that it won't be arbitrary decision making by our staff, but it's going to be that kind of involvement. And if that's what happens, I think we'll be in good shape. And just one other thing, in terms of the balance that we do between the businesses and the residents, I think that is vital. And I know that nobody came to testify opposition. I haven't heard the opposition. We haven't gotten letters. I think it's been out there. I think our staff getting out there, Kristen, going out and talking to people. If it were that devastating, I think, we'd have heard it.
Wirecast.
We usually do hear from them. So I'm hoping certainly that nobody was silent and is at home simmering and, or hearing about this for the first time and didn't come forward. But again, I think we need to trust in that process. So thank you to the staff and to the neighbors for this great collaborative process. And let's hope it works. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd.
Can we just have a quick recess? I can check with Mr. O'Leary on. Can I just have a brief recess to check with Mr. O'Leary on an amendment that was.
Sure. I'm going to have actually Mr. Davidoff start talking because I would probably go.
Oh, yeah, right.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So since this sort of has something to do with zoning, I guess I can have some type of discourse. No, seriously, in 2016 is when we started talking about this.
Of Wirecast.
So it just illustrates how slow the wheels of government work, but it just shows this evening that it did work because we had a collaboration between town staff, various departments, community planning, economic development, town planner, public safety, engineering, public works, and our residents who were directly affected in the center to try to find solutions that make sense.
This is a demonstration
And
of Wirecast.
tonight we're talking about celebrating our success as a community. And I don't think we should lose sight of that because if West Hartford Center was not a vibrant area, people may not choose to live there. We probably wouldn't have a parking problem. People wouldn't be working there. So we should celebrate that success. And what we're doing this evening is managing that success to protect the quality of life that our residents expect when they purchase a piece of property in that particular neighborhood. I've had the privilege of going on some police ride-alongs twice in that neighborhood at various hours, and I have seen excessive noise at that hour. I've seen behavior that is shameful and not worth reporting in the newspaper. And it sort of puts a blemish on our community to see how some individuals take their independent liberty to just do as they please without any respect or regard for the personal property rights of others. Not all, but there are isolated cases that happens. So this evening, we're going to give the manager what I believe is a good plan as the traffic authority to tell people 11 o'clock at night is really, in our vibrant center, not the time that you ought to be having the conversation out in our residential neighborhoods. Bring it more towards our commercial district. Let's not have that type of behavior out there. And I think that's good. I think that's a step in the right direction. And as I've seen over the years that I've been on the council, if we're not getting it right, we'll fix it again. And I think that's important because what I think this entire experience has taught us is that we're listening to our residents, we're doing our homework and researching for creative solutions. I think this is a very creative solution, and it's forward thinking, and it's not written in stone because nothing we do is written in stone, and it can change because circumstances can change. So I think my time is up. And I think that Mr. Sweeney has spoken to Corp Counsel O'Leary and got the other portion of his amendment ready. But I'll just end with this, and that is, I didn't think when I came here this evening that we would be spending almost an hour talking about this particular ordinance. But I'm glad we did because what it demonstrated is that there's a lot of thoughtful discussion and reasoning and common sense that goes into our deliberations, no matter how small or how big the issue may be before the council. So for all those reasons, I will be supporting the ordinance this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Mr. Sweeney, you ready? Or
Sorry, I have two amendments. I'm gonna have Mr. O'Leary read the first. it is, of my opinion, based on the outcome of the committee and the geographical area, I think that we could accomplish this with this language. I will propose it. Just before I get into that, again, the way this is written is a townwide policy. It is not a pilot program. It has not been designated as that in any such way here outside of just language. So that is where I'm coming from, and the concern that this is a townwide policy, and I take that very seriously in regards to what Mr. Davidoff said, and I completely take into the account of the neighbors' issues. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the entire town, because what you guys have done, it only encapsulates the issues that you guys see, and I want to make sure that, from my perspective, that we do this better on the townwide. So, Mr. Olair, if you could just read the amendment.
So just to be clear where we're starting from, when we draft an ordinance, the general principle is that you do make it townwide. You make it of general applicability because, for the most part, the principle is that our ordinances should apply equally to everybody. There are times, for example, in zoning ordinances where you deliberately divide the town into districts, but within those districts, wherever they're placed, the regulations are uniform. And with that in mind, we drafted the ordinance to be townwide. What I heard from Mr. Sweeney tonight and started playing around with as he was talking is the idea of sort of standing that on its head and starting with this area.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Treating this in essence as a pilot. And so what you have in front of you, the amendment to subsection A1C of the ordinance, we would add at the beginning of that subsection, within the area bounded by the north side of Farmington Avenue, the east side of Raymond Road, the south side of Boulevard, and the west side of Woodrow Street, comma, small p, parking, and then it goes on with the text that's there now. So that it only applies within that rectangle. And that's a loose rectangle, but it covers the areas that seem to be bounded by the map that Mr. McGovern had submitted to you. And that's the text of the First Amendment.
So I offered the amendment on the resolution.
Okay, would someone like to second?
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I think,
So then it fails, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. So
now I personally, I actually want to go to, well, we can talk about it again, but Ms. Kerrigan, why don't you go with your statement?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry.
that's.
Sorry, you had another amendment.
Yes,
I
sorry.
apologize.
The other amendment is on the
This is
the
a
provision
demonstration
for
of
the
Wirecast.
case exemptions. So
Subsection D.
yeah, subsection D. The amendment would essentially strip out everything after may be granted. So it would read, the West Hartford Police Department shall establish a procedure by which case-by-case exemptions from the provision of subparagraphs B and C of this section may be granted. So basically, not calling out of any, there'd be nothing in here that would allow for discretion. It'll allow for, if you call and you want it, you get it, you get it granted. But we allow for the West Hartford Police to develop this procedure. So.
Wait, can you just say where it ends again? I'm sorry. It ends at may be granted,
So
period?
subparagraphs B and C of this section may be granted, period. That would be it. So you're basically removing.
For the time period of 3 days
the
and
time,
then,
you talk about who, what, where.
and granted.
Yeah. So, I'm offering the amendment.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I'll second. I want to discuss this a bit more. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'll show you.
Here.
Go ahead. Would you like to talk about it, Ben?
Yeah, that's what I want to, go ahead. No, again, I second it so that we can have a discussion. So your objection to so you're limiting the 3-day duration limit.
This
that-
is a demonstration of
and the-
Wirecast.
So you're expanding what exemptions could be made.
Right, and the guess of the result of, and the,
Sorry.
For SE, the unavoidable circumstance issue, just to eliminate that as a
requirement that they do it.
Yeah.
So the police would still have discretion to set their own standards, which may include
Right.
that. I guess my question is, do you want
As it's drafted right now, it says they may.
This
that they-
is a demonstration of
such exemptions
Wirecast.
may be granted to the owners. Who's also be, well, right now, I mean, I would read the may in the ordinance as being, I'd add an only in there, right? I mean, so that, right, currently, exemptions may only be granted, even though it doesn't say that. That's the way I would read it, because it's giving permission to do so. So, as written, it could only be granted to owners or occupants who become available on unavoidable circumstance. That's how
This is
it's
a demonstration
currently
of
written. So what you're pulling that out so
Yeah.
that they could expand.
Yes.
the
Yes, so you could expand it to if you have a guest coming, you could call in, they could call in, again, of unavoidable, like defining what unavoidable circumstances. I think if we're going to, go down this and to the point that Councilman Dodge gave, if you need to move your car into the street and you live there or you have a guest there, you should be able to do that without receiving a ticket. If you are, again, you're calling the police department to notify them that you're doing so.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree that the police ought to be sort of more liberal on this to the extent possible. So if you're pointing that this is actually perhaps making it more restrictive than even currently is done, I'd agree that we shouldn't make that more restrictive. So that,
Language makes it less restrictive. The amendment offered makes it less restrictive than what currently is proposed.
Mr. Dodge.
This is
Thank
a
you, Madam Mayor.
demonstration of Wirecast.
I support the amendment. As I said, I don't think that the police should get into a question of whether the circumstances that you need to have a car on the street are avoidable or unavailable. Again, I can talk from personal experience where it was questioned at one time. And so I think, basically if you're a resident in this town and you or somebody who's a guest in your home needs to park on the street for some reason, you should be allowed to. So I view this as making it more permissive, and I plan to support it. My only question was for.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I guess this is for Mr. Allaire. It's just the sub D here affects C, which is giving the town manager a new power. Should it be the police department developing this procedure, or should it be the town manager?
The police department is who you call if you want the omit under the current procedure. And so when I originally, subsection D was originally the standalone ordinance, and we added the parking
of
in
Wirecast.
west of the center to something I'd already drafted for that other purpose. It was simply intended to codify existing practice, and maybe it would help, given the debate that we've had, it might help to have a little bit of historical perspective, not hysterical, but historical perspective. In the 1950s, the police department implemented a regulation, which procedurally they had the power to do under our charter and ordinances, banning parking between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. It was a public safety rationale that at 3 in the morning, when a police officer is patrolling the street, any car on the vehicle is now a suspicious vehicle. And it has worked for all of these years. Sometime in the late 80s, just after I came here, somebody called up and was very angry that they'd gotten the ticket and wanted to know, well, what's the legal authority for this? And I had to go find it because it's not published. And that really became the issue. We amended the ordinances to make it an ordinance violation because people couldn't find it. It was a regulation on file with the town clerk, but not in our published ordinances. So we created the ordinance saying no parking between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. From the 50s on, because it was a regulation of the police department, there was also an omit program that the police department implemented to waive its own regulation. That never got picked up and carried forward with the ordinance. So time passes, 2019, somebody,
This
I
is
think
a
it was actually
demonstration of
Assistant Chief
Wirecast.
McHugh, raised with me, could we incorporate the omit process into the ordinance since the 2 to 5 is in there? And that's how we got to this point. The idea was not to change the procedure. The idea was to make sure that the police department had an ordinance basis for saying that they could have the procedure that they've had since the 50s in one form or another. So if the concern now is that the procedure
This is a
that's in
demonstration
place
of Wirecast.
is too restrictive, because I tried to draft it to make it mirror what the procedure is now, then there's certainly no reason you can't do that. I would point out that the reason for the 3 days, if you call on the third day and say, I need another 3 days, and I can vouch for this from personal experience, they will do it. But they give you 3 days at a time so that cars don't get left on the street indefinitely. You know, your engine
This
dies,
is a demonstration
and now
of
it's
Wirecast.
on the street indefinitely. So
Thank you.
that's the reason for that. As far as the unavoidable circumstances, it's open to debate.
I
Mr.
hope that's the title of your first book on retirement too, is A Brief History of West Hartford Parking Ordinances. Yeah, I have no problem with the 3 day, with the 3 day restriction. I think it makes sense. I think obviously we don't want people parking on the street indefinitely. I think it's this other piece where, you know, what's unavoidable circumstances, I think that could be applied arbitrarily. I think in my experience it has. So I support the amendment. My question about whether it's the town manager or the police department is probably a distinction without a difference, so.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Mr. Hart wanted to speak, so I'm cutting you off.
Thank you, Mayor. And that's the point I wanted to make. As I heard the amendment, I didn't hear the 3 day limit on duration. I think having some limit would be important. I just took a complaint recently from a constituent about an out-of-state car that had been parked in front of their home for some period of time.
This is
It
a
did,
demonstration
the
of
owner of the car
Wirecast.
or the driver had received a proper omit, but again, I think having some cap on duration would be important.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And I'm just procedurally, this is Mr. Barnes said, would this apply townwide? And yes, it would. This would not be restricted to this neighborhood that we're talking about.
Correct. The omit process is townwide, correct.
Right. So to substantially change it in a way, would
is a
we then need
demonstration
to
of
notice,
Wirecast.
and would it require a separate public hearing? I mean, obviously, if you were to take out the limit, it does change the duration, it does change the,
Madam Mayor,
The
may I just withdraw the amendment and then re-offer another amendment that puts in the 3 days to accommodate the issues that the town manager has in here?
thank you.
Thank you. So it reads as was,
This is a
the West Hartford Police
demonstration of
Department is hereby
Wirecast.
empowered to establish a procedure by which case-by-case exemptions from provisions of subparagraphs B and C of the subsection may be granted for periods up to 3 days in duration. Yeah, that's what I just read.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think,
Oh, sorry, withdraw it again. West Hartford Police, and I'm just changing shall be empowered. Sorry, guys.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I don't follow you.
The West Hartford Police Department shall be empowered to establish a procedure by which case-by-case exemptions from the provision of subparagraphs B and C of the subsection may be granted for periods of up to 3 days in duration. It removes basically the last part of the.
Well, it does,
What?
Why shall instead of the is hereby?
Shall by.
Is hereby.
Sure, either it's.
I mean, just
This
a
is a
extra change
demonstration
that.
of Wirecast.
I just wrote it
Right,
off
okay.
the top of my head.
Shall was in his original
Yeah.
amendment.
It
Oh,
was.
it wasn't.
It was in my original
Okay.
amendment too. So I offer the amendment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Can I speak to it for a second? So I do, it's a little unexpected that we would spend a lot of time on this, but I do think this is something that we need to talk more about, but not in this. And I think we would need to notice it, and that this is a policy change that impacts our whole community. I actually like the language, all of it, because I do think it gives the police some discretion. But I would say, rather than result of unavoidable circumstances, the only amendment I would make is as a result of independent circumstances. Individual. So I'm sorry, not independent. Individual circumstances.
I would withdraw my amendment to take your amendment to this.
Okay, is there, I don't know what's going on with my, is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded. Is there, so the amendment's on the table. Can we vote on that amendment? Mr. Williams?
I would just say, and I would defer to Corporation Counsel on this, but I think when we use words in statute or ordinance, we just have to be careful. I don't know what independent means versus unavoidable or individual. So I think you're right. The second part of this paragraph is very important, because otherwise the police department doesn't have any discretion to enforce an exemption, and an exemption without the ability to use means that the rule is swallowed. So I think we might want to, if this is an issue that the town council is concerned about, I think we need to look at this particular language more in committee or what have you.
And I said that, and then I actually went back on what I just said. So I do agree. I think this is something that we need to look at separately, and is going to be a discussion that we're going to have to amend this ordinance for after we fully evaluate the 2 to 5, because I think there's significant interest at the table to look at that again. I'm not happy with the language. I agree that it's not unavoidable. I will say that the police, but I don't think at this table, at this time, without discussing this particular policy, we're ready to make an amendment.
Just on that note, and I will put a button on this, I swear.
This is a demonstration of
if we are
Wirecast.
going to say that we can't make changes here today, I mean, I just find that to be kind of counterintuitive to what we're talking about in general. I made requests of staff in this process, of which were not provided to me via email, and then we had this on the agenda. So of which I am dealing with it in the same way that everyone else is, and that is where it is today. But we are here because there was communication that was formally made in a public hearing, of which I did not hear anything back from. We could have solved this prior to this had we had that communication provided to me or to anyone that was at that public safety meeting. It was not. So I'm just saying, if we are talking about making decisions today because we're being rushed or we don't want to be rushed, I would just encourage folks, when those requests are made by counselors at public hearings or committee meetings, that they be followed up with.
So how about offering this? Or that we vote on this resolution, and we also refer a portion of it back to committee, if that could be done, to review this section in committee.
So procedurally, if I'm following this, we're going to vote, or you're going to vote on the ordinance unamended, and then you would do you suspend the rules, have a separate resolution to refer subsection A1D back to committee for further discussion.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Mr. Barnes.
Or alternatively, is it possible just to pull it back, take it back into committee, address whatever issues have been raised around this table, and come back with a new amendment and have a vote on that amendment as opposed to taking it piecemeal?
I thought about that, and we are rushing towards a change potentially in council, and I'm afraid that it would set us back for changes that have been in process for 2 years, and I'm just a little concerned about
Wirecast.
that process because of the notice of the public hearing and the public hearing, and that would be my concern. So I think this could accomplish both.
Okay. So that concern would be delay, but procedurally, would there be anything that would prevent us from doing that, basically tabling this and bringing it back?
I'm not sure you'd, well, let me think about it. Procedurally, you could continue the public hearing.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
And table the item. Or you could close the public hearing and vote down the item without prejudice as to bringing it back as a new ordinance. Either of those processes, yes, you could do. I think the mayor asked a question earlier about would some of these amendments be substantive enough? And what she's getting at is there's a charter requirement that basically says if you make a substantive amendment during the hearing process, as you're doing or debating tonight, if that in my ruling was substantive, you'd be required to renotice and republish for a new hearing anyway. Yeah. So procedurally, it might not make, depending on the amendments that were being offered, it might not make a difference timing-wise. Because the same problem that the mayor's raising about the new council coming in would probably mean that you're looking at a new hearing sometime in December anyway.
Wirecast.
I think what we may see happen in that interim is if you don't adopt the ordinance tonight, the town manager can't implement the signage until you do, and we're heading into the holiday season. And it may be an issue for parking between now and Christmas if we don't have another hearing until December.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Okay, Mr. Winograd, Mr. Dodge first, okay.
I guess it's sort of a two-part question. To Mr. Allaire, if we were to simply strike D so that we could deal with it separately at some future date, would we be able to act on the rest of the amendment or on the rest of the ordinance tonight? And would that affect the department's current ability to offer omits?
Yes, you could strike D, and I would rule that that's not substantive because it's within the scope of if you had voted the ordinance down. So yes, you could strike D. How it would affect the police department issuing omits, I honestly don't know. I haven't talked to anybody in the department since I first drafted this several months back. I would imagine that they will continue doing what they're doing now.
I mean, they're doing it now without the language. So I guess, Madam Mayor, if you were amenable to it, I would offer an amendment to simply strike D, refer it back to committee, and then we can vote on the ordinance.
It accomplishes the same thing. I'm absolutely fine with that. So if that amendment's on the table.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, we can do not a roll call vote for the amendment.
So the amendment is to strike section D.
All those in favor? Oh,
I'm sorry.
Do you have a question?
I just want to make sure that I understand the result of that. So we're saying because it's currently not in an ordinance, they're going to continue to do what they're
This is a
doing.
demonstration of
We strike D,
Wirecast.
take it back to committee, and discuss however to address this, and then provide an amendment at the future date, whatever it is, right? But we're not changing the practice town-wide. They're going to continue to do what they're doing.
Yes.
Because I think it's an important enough issue to warrant further discussion before, in this context, making this important decision as part of this discussion, right? So we're all on the same page. We're going to take it back.
And I completely agree with you, Mr. Burns. I think that's why it makes sense to take it out tonight. And it goes back to our discussion of this is a big deal. It's a town-wide policy. I think that, if we're going to look at the OMIT system, that actually does merit some further discussion. I think it's frankly a separate issue from what these poor folks are now here until 9:15 for tonight. And so I think, let's separate it out and we can look at the future.
Okay, was my, all set? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. So now we will have this amended.
This is a demonstration
Do
of
you have another
Wirecast.
comment? Okay, all right. I think we left off Ms. Kerrigan's comments on the remainder of the ordinance.
Why are we here? Wow, just add another year on to your process. I am supporting this parking ordinance, which I kind of laugh because it's not about parking at all. I mean, if it was about parking, I don't think you would be here. It's about the quality of life, as all the councilors have referenced. It's about you living in a neighborhood that used to close at 10, and it sounds like it's open at 10 and going on until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So now your front yard is kind of like being in a college dorm, on a Friday night. So I appreciate your patience with this. I'm not too sure I would be quite as patient as you have been. So it's really not about parking. It is about quality of life. I want to thank the staff, Mark McGovern, Kristen Korski, Todd Dumay. That's a quite amount of time you've invested and energy and making sure that everybody gets what they need and want, which is really difficult. The police that were involved and everyone else, so thank you that. And I do want to, here he is, Councilor Dodge, I'm so sorry that you are leaving, not for that moment, but for you're not running again, because I do agree that our town needs to look at this 2 to 5 window, because I live on Arnoldale Road, and when there's 4 people living in a house with 1 driveway, and everyone has their own little shifts, I'm always parking on the street one time or another, and it is a burden, quite frankly, to have 2 to 5. And I'm not suggesting that in your neighborhood, because we're not exposing ourselves to the partying that you folks have. So thank you for your patience, and I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Any other comments on this? Okay, so first I want to thank Todd, who's still upstairs and probably will be for a while. No, I don't know. Mark and Kristen for their incredible work on this. This has been a real commitment. Thank you to the neighbors, the whole group of you, and I hope you pass on our thanks, because we did start this a while ago, 2016, and we understood that you had priorities, but we also need to make sure that our vibrant West Hartford Center that often defines West Hartford outside of West Hartford, not inside West Hartford, but we treasure it and we want to preserve it, and it won't work if the neighborhood around it is not happy and if it's this battle. So you took a step back and allowed us to keep moving forward a little bit with our vision on the professional development of the center, and we have more work to do on that. While you continued to meet and talk about the priority and the quality of life, and I completely agree with the Deputy Mayor that it's not about parking. This is really a quality of life issue. Although parking is the vehicle, pun intended, to allow you a change in the quality of life. But we are really in tune with the businesses and how this will impact our businesses. I do think that with the parking inventory that we have, and we can be flexible, we have done a lot of outreach, and Kristen especially has done outreach to try to work with businesses and how we can keep that viability and affordability for workers and convenience. So I really I'm happy to be at this place, and that's why I really didn't want to extend this further, because I feel like you've waited a long time for this night to happen. It's not in stone, and this may be changing over time. So I really think we're in the right place. This is an example of how West Hartford works. Might be slow, but we think it's right. We have, again, to preserve the success of the center with the balance with our whole community's quality of life and safety. So this is a unique neighborhood. I don't think your story applies in many places throughout the town, maybe in a couple other spots, but not a lot. I trust that the town manager and town staff will take all of these changes extremely seriously. We do trust in that. We know the outreach and the commitment that they've made already, and will continue to do so. So with that, I will be supporting this amended ordinance. So, all right, can we do a roll call, Ms. Lebrun? We have to make a motion for the amended ordinance. Motion to approve the ordinance as amended. Motion's been made and seconded. No.
Mr. Barnes.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Ms. Cantor.
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff.
Yes.
Mr. Dodge.
Yes.
Ms. Fay.
Yes, and amen.
Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Sweeney.
Yes.
Mr. Winograd. Yes. And Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you for, really, thank you very much for all of you out there that have endured this. Okay, where are we? 5B.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of an ordinance adopting a revision and recodification of the
This
code
is a
of the Town of
demonstration
West
of
Hartford, Connecticut,
Wirecast.
providing for code amendments and the repeal of certain obsolete and conflicting ordinances.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart, can you do a very brief explanation of this?
This is, as was explained during the public hearing, this is something that's statutorily required every 10 years. We're a little bit behind, but we're looking to accomplish this.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And this was is an ordinance, so we have to take a roll call? Okay.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Ms. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff?
Yes.
Mr. Dodge?
Yes.
Ms. Fay?
Yes.
Ms. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Winograd?
Yes.
And Mr. Williams?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Wonderful, we're on a roll. 5C. Ms. Kerrigan.
Sorry. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know whether it's on or off. I move adoption of an ordinance establishing a West Hartford Prevention Council.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart, brief explanation?
Thank you, Mayor. As explained during the public hearing earlier
This is
tonight,
a
we
demonstration
have an
of
ordinance on the books
Wirecast.
that dates back to 1989. It's in need of an update in order to streamline things, reduce the number of members to make it more consistent with today's needs. So we're seeking your support on this ordinance as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Okay, roll call, Ms. LeBrow?
Yes.
Ms. Cantor?
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff?
Yes.
Mr. Dodge?
Yes.
Ms. Fay?
Yes.
Ms. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Winograd? And Mr. Williams?
Yes.
I just want to also say a quick thank you to Helen Rubino
This is
Turco
a
for her
demonstration of
focus on this, and
Wirecast.
this is a very, very important service that this council provides. Okay, 5D.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move adoption of a resolution authorizing the execution of an easement in favor of Gastro Park Holdings LLC.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded, and we did just receive the unanimous vote from TPZ. So we are, that is decided, it's part of the record.
This is a
and we'll,
demonstration of
All those in
Wirecast.
favor? Mr. Hart, would you like to explain that?
I'd be happy to. Council will recall earlier last month the TPZ approved the applicant's Gastro Park Holdings LLC's application for a special use permit. It was conditioned on a couple of things, one of them being obtaining an easement to locate a sanitary sewer line through 3 different properties, one of them
This is a
owned by the
demonstration of
town.
Wirecast.
So you refer this, as you had to do, to TPZ for review, and they've come back with a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. It's hot off the press. They just did that tonight. So, okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations. And then 6A. Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we set for public hearing on November 12, 2019 at 7 p.m. in the Legislative Chamber and refer to TPZ, DRAC, and CROG, an application filed on
This is
behalf
a
of Newington
demonstration of
West Farms
Wirecast.
TMC LLC, owner of 1553-1559 New Britain Avenue, Special Development District, number 103. The requested amendment is for architectural modifications to the facade and existing pylon sign and for the removal of certain prior SDD conditions of approval regarding use restrictions. Associated landscaping improvements are proposed.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
This
Motion
is a
carries.
demonstration
6B.
of Wirecast.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we set for public hearing on November 12, 2019 at 7:20 in the Legislative Chamber and refer to TPZ, a resolution authorizing the town manager to execute a lease with the Universalist Church.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Item 6C.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we adopt a resolution establishing an annual salary range for certain unclassified positions.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mayor. We reviewed this item with the
This is a
Finance and Budget Committee
demonstration of
last week.
Wirecast.
Council will recall that you authorized the establishment of 3 part-time positions for this fiscal year. 2 of the 3 did not have an assigned pay range, so we are seeking approval to establish a pay range for those 2 positions. It's an emergency management position as well as a recycling coordinator position. The salary ranges that we're proposing are based upon an internal comparison as well as a comparison against external salary data positions in place in other towns. And if approved, we would be able to operate within the approved budget with both of these proposals. And we're seeking your support.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Barnes?
I just wanted, consistent with my no vote on the budget and opposing the addition of new positions, I'm going to vote no. Instead of just voting no, I just wanted to put on the record why I'm voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. All right, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. All right.
This is a demonstration
6E,
of Wirecast.
6C, and I think we are,
Reports, town manager.
reports from town manager. Start.
Thank you, Mayor. I know the hour's late. My report's loaded in board docs. I would encourage you to read it at your leisure. 2 quick points I want to make. The American Legion was considering holding a Firefighter of the Year event this week. Noted that that does conflict with an important religious holiday. So
This
that
is a demonstration of
celebration,
Wirecast.
that award ceremony will be scheduled to a later date. You may have received an email on this within a day or two. So please disregard. It's not happening this week. We'll be following up. They'll be scheduling it for later this fall. And then secondly, I will miss your next meeting. I will be at my, my national conference for ICMA, and I'll provide the Finance and Budget Committee on a report regarding my attendance at its next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Announcements, I have a few.
This is a
Cast your vote for
demonstration
Best
of
of West
Wirecast.
Hartford. This will take place on Monday, November 4th at Fleming's. And I think the voting ends this week, so make sure you go to weha.com and you cast your vote. WHPS, so that's West Hartford Public Schools, is seeking mentors. Think of mentoring things that changed your life, become a mentor and change a life. The 101 workshop will be held on Tuesday, October 27th, 5 to 6:30 at Conrad High School's REACH program, located in the high school, behind the high school in a separate building. You
This
can make
is
a
a
difference.
demonstration of
Carol
Wirecast.
Wilkes at 860-231-6009. 10-minute walk day, you heard in the proclamation, will be 10-10 at 10. And we will be joined by, I don't know, whatever. It'll be great. Later at 1 p.m., join West Hartford Senior Center Fitness Center Supervisor Catherine, who will lead a walk to Westmore Park. Autumn Flea Market will be held by Elmo Community Center on Saturday, October 10th from 9 to 2. Shayna Madel
This
is
is a
playing at
demonstration
Park
of
Playhouse on
Wirecast.
Park. From October 30th to November 17th. It's a powerful drama about survival and years after separation brought on by the Holocaust. It's a wonderful show. I've seen it. Mamma Mia by West Hartford Community Theater, the popular jukebox musical based on the songs of ABBA, will be performed at Hall High School on November 15th, 16th, and 22nd and 23rd at 7:30, and November 17th and 24th at 2 p.m. Tickets are on sale now and can be purchased at their website. Any other announcements?
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Okay, hi, Leon.
Madam Mayor, I think I want to remind you, for those who celebrate in the Jewish faith, I wish everyone a very happy and healthy New Year, and may your fast be easy in the days coming ahead. And I know the mayor shares those sentiments.
I do. I wish everyone a happy, sweet, peaceful New Year. And I actually went to the Nepalese New Year festival last night, and I wish also a happy Dashan Nepalese New Year. Okay. And
This is a
reports from
demonstration of
Corporation Council.
Wirecast.
Mr. Allaire, I know.
I'd like to start by announcing my powerful trilogy of books upcoming, the first of which is going to be a lair on critters, the second of which is going to be a brief history of parking regulation in West Hartford, and the third is going to be entitled, No, Quorum Does Not Mean a Majority of Those Present and Voting. And by the way, think about that one for a second. That's a real definition that was in a regulation where someplace.
Fascinating.
Yes. We do need an executive session to discuss
Wirecast.
2 matters of pending litigation. For the media in the room, we will not be doing a vote afterwards, so I'm not going to be asking you for a vote, so.
Okay, I make a motion to go into executive session. Second. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay, we'll see you now.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. 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 This is a demonstration of Wirecast.